Well, it is such a pleasure to be here. I want to give a shout out to the Radial System team who've been making everything run beautifully and who have been giving us a chance to hear from incredible speakers. And I don't know about you, but myself, I'm kind of hitting a point in the day where I need to like wiggle or move a little bit. No, and you're like, oh my God, he's gonna make me dance. Yes, no, a little bit. So there's a song that's about to start playing. Well, it's playing right now. And what I want you to do as this song is playing is I want you to think about how you can add something to it. So it doesn't have to be a big thing. It might be like a little snap or a little stomp or a little, I don't know, or maybe you don't even know what to do. And if you don't know what to do, I want you to look around the room and see what someone else is doing. So let's like raise that sound up a little bit. And as it starts coming in, maybe you're just like thinking, oh, that's nice. A little more. If you don't know what to do, look around you. Like, can you copy from someone else that's nearby? What if you stood up a little bit? Raise that energy up a little bit? No, okay, we'll stop right there. We can kill the music. Amazing. All right. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. So, the title of this talk is Serious Nonsense. Because I feel like last year I was finally able to describe my career, which is being dedicated to anti-professionalism. The other day, right? The other day when we were doing the mixer, one of the questions was, what's the worst piece of advice that you've ever received? And I thought back and I was like, oh man, there was a point where I went into government. And I had a wonderful mentor, and I know they had the best of intentions, but what they said to me was, well, you know what you should do when you kind of go into government is you should like put a blazer on it. I was like, okay, what does that mean? I was like, oh yeah, just like put a blazer on it, both like maybe physically and metaphorically. I was like, okay. And so I went into government and we did a bunch of stuff, and it was honestly one of the things that I regret doing the most in my career. And I have spent the last 10 years taking that blazer off. And part of what that means, it's one of those things. Part of what that means is actually stepping away from some of the qualities of white supremacy that are endemic inside of design, right? Perfectionism, timeliness, one way of being right, like all of that shit. Pardon me, sorry friends on the screen there. And it also means maybe telling stories that are a little bit messy, and telling stories and showing diagrams that don't necessarily make sense. And so when I give you this presentation, I'm going to try to cover all of the things that I put inside of our, the abstract about what we're going to do. And you're probably wondering, okay, this is going to be a talk about what is play and how does it matter? And you're going to see pictures of Lego and color, and probably not. You're going to see pictures of my garden. Like seriously. And that's because I think that we need to get a little bit deeper. And we need to uncover the true nature, and many of you already are, about what is the process of being alive? And what can that teach us about how we decide to apply these tool sets and mindsets and skill sets to our work or to ourselves? I'm lucky enough to work at a company called J5. We are in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Mohkinstsis. I'll say a little bit more about that. We're another one of these incredible purpose-led organizations. Some of my wonderful colleagues are in the audience here. Pam and Sid, can you give them a round of applause for being finalists in the Service Design Award this year? And we live at this place where two rivers come together. So this is a bit of a map. And when you fly into Calgary, you can see this incredible landscape. And over time, I've come to understand that knowing where you're from can really help you make sense of almost everything else that comes after that. So when you arrive in Calgary and you come to a workshop or a session, people will give a land acknowledgement, and they'll say something like, we're not too near and not too far. Right now, we're really far from a place where two rivers come together, the Bow River and the Elbow River, Mohkinstsis, the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 Nations, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, including Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw, as well as those who call Métis Region 3 home. I myself am a settler. My last name, Kristofer Kelly-Frere, sounds very settler. And Kelly is actually a made-up last name. My actual name is Kislavich. And in the 1950s, my great-grandparents couldn't get jobs. So they decided to go from one persecuted minority to another persecuted minority and chose Kelly instead. And I married into a giant French Catholic family. And when I also tell people about coming from Alberta, they think about this, especially Germans. right? You're like, I will come to the mountains. The water will be blue. It will be amazing. But Alberta also looks like this. And the thing is that this magical, strange landscape is something we call an ecotone. The city I live in, the place that I'm from, is literally a tipping point. If you add water in that environment, you get trees. If you take it away, you get prairie. And both of those things are incredibly complex. And the nature of a tipping point environment is that the way you behave really matters. If you happen to live, say, in a coastal rainforest ecosystem like Vancouver, the trees don't really give a crap about what you do. That was a joke. No, clearly, right? Anyway, they have a momentum. That you found that funny, right? A little bit, yeah. They have a momentum. But in a tipping point environment, the way you behave really matters. And I think that there's something important there that can teach us things. And it has to do with gardening, like I said. One of the designers that has really influenced my path has been Pete Udolph. He's a landscape designer. If you've been to New York and seen the High Line, you've probably seen these pictures of beautiful, complex landscapes. They almost look wild. And in an essay at the front of one of his gardening books, he says, if you want to design in a place, the first thing you have to do is learn to fall in love with the ditches. Because the ditches, the empty lots, the places where no one is paying attention, show you what wants to happen there. And if you can fall in love with that, and you can notice and understand the patterns that are present in that, you can decide what is what matters. And this is a picture of my front yard. And every spring, you will find my husband, Mackenzie, he's a very kind of dapper man. He'll be out in the garden with a hose, standing there. It's like, the frost hasn't even melted. The snow is still on some parts of the trees, and he's watering the garden. And I remember asking him when I first met him, why are you watering? Right? It's like barely, the snow hasn't even come off the ground. Why are you watering? And he's like, just wait. And one day I asked him, well, what are you waiting for? And he said, I'm trying to decide what's a weed. Because every spring, if you water the ground in the place that I'm from, different things will sprout. New seeds have planted themselves in different spots, and they've gone through that kind of natural cycle of coming to life. And weeds are a choice, right? The thing that we decide shouldn't be there becomes the weed. And, every day in that garden, things are going through this kind of natural cycle. They're asking 3 very simple questions. What? So what? Now what? What? So what? Now what? Right? Trying to imagine the plant is sitting there what? So what? Now what? I promise you, I'll get you there somewhere. If you do that with a hypothesis and methods and rigor and maybe a research ethics board, we call it science. If you do it with empathy and some kinds of tools, we call it design. If you do it with mud or you let a young person do it, we call it play. And a plant that's having the sun shine on it is asking those same questions. What? So what? Now what? That is the mother recipe, I am convinced. And if that feels true, does that feel true to anyone? That's the deep process of life. And honestly, we get in the way of it all the time. Now, in the title of this talk, it said, serious nonsense, play, design, needs to lighten up, all of those things. And so you might be wondering, is he going to tell me what play is? And I'm going to offer a few different ways of understanding this idea of play, and they're all kind of the same story told in different ways. The UN describes play as freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated. Freely chosen, personally directed. Something about that was funny? Yeah, amazing. I have the fans are over here. The Queerdo fans are over here. Freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated. And that kind of play is the sort of thing that if you close your eyes for a moment and you think back maybe to a moment when you were younger, maybe to a moment where you had a bit more space in your life, it's the kind of thing that happens when no one is telling you what to do. And it matters because it grows brains. We grow our brains through a process called serve and return. If you want to live in the kind of very structured world, neuroscientists talk about how a parent will serve up a smile to a little kid. and that little baby will smile back. And that process, that cycle of serve and return, is how our brains learn. It's how we regulate, and it's how we start to be comfortable in the world around us. And sometimes that looks a little bit like doing this with your daughter. That's my daughter. Her name is Elizabeth. She is 8 years old now, and this is the output of a long serve and return process together, where we ended up covered in makeup. Oh, goodness, this is a different version of the presentation that I thought I was going to have. All right, so you're going to see some slides that I'm not going to talk about. And that is just fine, because at the end of the day, understanding play is one of the ways that we can get to the root of how we become comfortable with the world around us, how we understand how we can build adaptive capacity. I was going to have a very cute picture of my dog, but instead I have this one. Because again, unfortunately, we have a different version of the presentation, but that's fine. So this is Jake. And I want you to picture Jake. My dog Jake is a beautiful German Shepherd red heeler. So he's like equal parts stubborn and brilliant. He's a 70-pound dog who gets really upset at the world. Does anybody else have a dog that gets upset, or they call it reactive? Yes? No? Right? It's a long slog. It's a hard thing. Because having an animal that doesn't know or gets worried by the world around it can be really challenging. Now, as a dog guardian, I had a lot of challenges trying to figure out, well, how do I help him? How do I behave? And along the way, there's every version in the book of like what you're supposed to do, kind of like this conference where it's like, what is service design? There's like 10 different versions about how you're supposed to behave and what you're supposed to do. Well, I ended up finding an incredible researcher named Dr. Amy Cook, and she talks about the power of fragile social play. So fragile social play is not play where you throw a ball and the dog runs and brings it back. Fragile social play is what you see two dogs do, and they kind of come up to each other and they nuzzle or they bump, and it's sort of this beautiful serve and return, very much like that smile and smile back that a child does. And the presence of fragile social play is actually one of the best indicators that your dog is in a place where they can learn. Often trainers will tell you that a dog is ready to learn if it can eat. And the thing is, many, many, many dogs actually can eat when they're super stressed. So what you want to do, at least what I am doing, what we are doing, is that you take the pup that you're around and you come to an environment where there aren't a bunch of stressors, and you start to practice this fragile social play. And in that process, you can tell where they're at. And if a trigger that they're worried about, something in the world that maybe they need to learn from, is present, that actual cycle also rewires their nervous system. And so play is this fundamental process that helps us understand how to be okay. And it can be an incredibly powerful indicator. And this is one of the first places where I'm going to connect this back into our practices as service designers. How many of you run icebreakers in your workshops? Yeah, lots of us. How many of us have had an icebreaker fail? Yeah, right? Like lots of us. That's because I think that icebreakers are often an indicator of readiness. They help us understand where the positionality of people are, how comfortable they are, how ready they are to learn. And that if we use them in a different way, we can almost hold our finger up in the wind and think about, where is this group at? And then in another frame, we can actually use those same tools of play to help build resilience, anti-fragility, comfort in a group. Okay, again, things are going to be a little bit out of order here, and that is all right. I know that people in our field as designers like to have logic models. They like to understand like what is one thing, what is another thing, what's in and what's out. So I'm going to offer you a few different spectrums to think about. On one hand, I want you to think about things being extrinsically motivated. So you have an outside force directing you about what to do. And on the other side, you have that intrinsic motivation. Now, the thing we kind of did at the beginning of the day here was definitely extrinsically motivated, right? It was one of those things where someone is telling you what to do. But you also had some amount of intrinsic choice about how to behave. And that's a really important sort of line to think about and a line to follow. Because in that definition that I showed you about what play might be, intrinsically motivated, personally directed, and freely chosen, the more we can move towards intrinsic motivation, the more powerful the work can become. When we talk about design, what does it mean? What's the purpose? What are we trying to figure out? Well, sometimes we talk about trying to design the right thing, or other times we talk about designing the thing right, and we talk about which phase in the double diamond we are. But at its core, I think one of our fundamental jobs is understanding what do people want to do. Now, I was really lucky. I had the chance to sort of cut my teeth on design in the science center field, which is why you saw some pictures of Frank Oppenheimer, who's the brother of the other Oppenheimer, Manhattan Project, bombs. There's like a whole story there I won't go into. Yeah, right, like Germany, something, I don't know. This is really bombing. This is not going very well. Anyway, when I came into the science center field, I was lucky enough to work with some folks who said, rather than trying to figure out the facts we want to teach people, I want you to explore how do you create an experience that enables intrinsic motivation, that creates affordance. And this is a picture, I'm going to play a little video of one of the pilots that we developed. We called them a pilot because the word prototype was broken in that context. And this is the pilot of an exhibit that eventually called Raindrop DJ. And we can turn the sound up on this. You're going to see myself, a much younger me, 15 years ago, starting to play with my friends. We can turn the sound up even more. And you can see we're kind of tentative, we're testing things out, little music is happening. My friend Carly there in the middle is clearly a percussionist. Vlad is my other friend on the side. He's like very technical, he's finding his way in. And as we go, why don't you just watch it? I'll stop talking. Let's get that volume a little louder. Still some hesitation. We're still going kind of slow. Oh, the water's coming on. It was like the Berghain moment. All right. Yeah, give a round of applause. So, I won't go into the entire piece here, but I know you're wondering, like, what is this slide about? I will get there. One of the things that you saw there is a great example of a play cycle. And there is an entire field called play work, an entire field of play workers who talk about holding a frame for play to happen. And in that play cycle, you watch these moments of initiation. You watch someone encounter an environment that affords a kind of behavior. And then you watch that play get deeper and more intrinsically motivated, and then it kind of blows up and the play cycle collapses and it starts again. And when that cycle is held well, that kind of serve and return is at play. It's magical. This is an example of probably the most successful pilot that we ever ran at the Science Center, because we were like, what can we do that people, like we were rushing around for an adult-only night. We were trying to make up activities for people to do. And at the last minute, we had an empty table. And so on the wall, we wrote, draw your junk. Right? Just 3 words, draw your junk. And we put some paper down. And we thought, no one will do this. And the night started, 2,000 people come into the building, and all 2,000 of them tried to spend the entire evening at that table drawing their junk. Because it had this deep sort of opportunity about creating something that people really wanted to do. Now, how often are our activities something people really want to do? Right? Yeah, hold that thought for a moment. So another way to think about this is to think about whether or not what we're offering is something that is structured or something that is emergent. So does it have rules, or is it coming up and evolving as it goes? I was lucky enough to, like they mentioned, spend some of my life as a tap dancer. And now, as a tap dancer, you actually oscillate between both worlds if you're lucky. You learn traditional dances like the... Oh, that was not too bad. I haven't done that for a while. Yeah, you can applaud. You learn repertoire. You learn the archive. But then if you're lucky, you also have friends who are willing to be in circle with you and to improvise. Another example of a structured activity is something like a soccer game, right? It has rules. It has ways of being. It has ways of winning. And it can be really, really fun. It is a great kind of play. Another version of that is sitting around the campfire without rules, right? Letting what happens emerge. A good party doesn't often have a lot of structure. I'm going to skip through some of these. Actually, no, we're going to go back to this one. I think this one will be fun. You're like, what is he going to do? Can I get everyone to stand up for a moment? All right, so I'm pretty sure you know. Let's turn that music right away. I think you probably know how to do this one. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. You can sit down again. So that is an example. There's a very technical drawing of the Macarena. That's another example of a structured way of playing. You're going to stand up again. And this time, I want you to imagine that there is a wall in front of you. And I want you to imagine that you're going to stick your nose against that wall, and then you're going to slide your chin against the wall, and your neck, and you're going to roll your body all the way down that wall, touching every part, and then in a moment your head is going to come forward. And this is like, you're going to do like a spinal wave. And you can close your eyes. And at whatever speed is the right speed for you, I want you to play with doing spinal waves. Okay, I want you to play with this like, that is not the right song for this. Yeah, a good song. So close your eyes, let this kind of wash over yourself, putting your nose there, letting that spinal wave come down. And in whatever way feels right to you as you're letting that spinal wave happen, maybe your eyes are still closed, you might reverse its direction. You can do it in whatever way works for you. Or kind of go to the side, let yourself explore those ways. Make it a little smaller. Make it a little smaller. I want you to dial it up and make it a little bit bigger right now. A little bit bigger. Dial it up another 10%. Another 10%. Another 10%. All right, well, you can sit down again. So, as I was planning this talk, it's nice to stand up. It's nice to see you all too. As I was planning this talk, I was trying to think about how do I offer a framework that describes some of these different ways of playing. And what I thought, this is something that we've used in our practice, we use in play work sometimes, is to talk about crossing those two tensions. So on one axis, you have intrinsically motivated and extrinsically motivated. So someone tells you what to do, or the player chooses what to do. And on the other hand, you have structured and unstructured. So up in one of these quadrants, right up at the very top, structured and extrinsically motivated, is soccer. In another quadrant, you have where maybe a little bit less structure, but it's still externally directed. You have things like camp games. But there's a magic quadrant. There's a magic quadrant that's down in this bottom that is emergent and intrinsically motivated. That is the most challenging kind of play to access. That is a kind of play that happens in the empty lot. That is the kind of play that is in those pictures that I showed about kids playing in the mud. And that is the kind of play that is the most powerful at building resilience. It is the most powerful at building connection between different people. I was really lucky to work on a project that was about bringing play to Canadian suburbs. We dropped 9 shipping containers, trained 300 play ambassadors, had 11,000 people participate over 4 years as part of a public health research project. And this is one of the best moments from it. This is a little girl named Robin, and she is riding in a suitcase. And she is having the time of her life. And the thing you don't see in this picture is that Robin's mom is on the other end of that rope, pulling her around. And the serve and return that happened that day was so magical that Robin's mom ended up training as a play ambassador. And then she ended up becoming a Play Hub leader, and she is still leading play work in her community in a way that supports her as a young parent every day. And that power is incredible because it's about holding the frame. It's about creating these conditions for magic to happen. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what does it look like for a bureaucracy to play? And if you use the framework I offered there, maybe the play doesn't have to look the way we think it does. It doesn't have to have multicolors and Lego and all this stuff. So I was hired at one point into a thing called the Civic Innovation Lab. This is a government municipal innovation lab. It's actually still running 8 years in. And we were tasked with doing this thing that many of you might be involved in, which is cutting red tape. Right? It was a citizen idea competition. We're going to have a funnel. And you know what? It completely failed. And if you want to talk about government labs failing, I would be very happy to over a beer or at the dance floor later. What did happen, on the other hand, is this magical thing called Mug Club. So when I arrived at this government institution, nobody was connected. And I was dying inside. And so one day, I remembered what a colleague of mine had done at the Science Center, which was she made coffee every Wednesday morning and put out an article and saw who came to talk. And over the course of the time that I was at the city of Calgary, we went from having, this is actually a picture of the first Mug Club on the top, we went from having 6 people show up to having 400 people on the email list. We would regularly get the senior management of the entire city of Calgary would show up to play with us in conversation. Oh, we're not going to see all of these because we're running out of time. One of the things that you can think about doing when you are offering play into an organization is to change the motivation. Adding emotion to an activity can be a powerful way to create a frame that people can opt into. Creating new kinds of permission can be a powerful way to create a frame for people to opt into. This is a permission letter that we wrote ourselves for a project because we wanted to use public space to try out some new activities with some students. And by the time that we could get the higher-ups to say yes and get that information down to the security guards, the day would be over. And so we just I wrote a permission letter to myself to do that work. And you can see some of the students playing here. One of the other things that you can do is change the context or change the materials. This is an example of a workshop we did with our team that was entirely focused on glasses of water and tarot cards. Very serious, right? It was actually a workshop about reflecting on what was possible and using image and metaphor as a way to play. So a little bit of structure, but mostly intrinsic motivation. And you can also change the place. Go outside, be in a different environment. For me, one of the places that I play is through poetry and art, because I think that lets you tap into something deeper. Now, if you decide to go down the sort of rabbit hole of learning about play, you'll actually encounter a thing called risky play, right? Risky play is the most powerful kind of play. It's the play that happens in that bottom quadrant. And it often gets described as play at speed, play with heights, play with dangerous materials. Sound like service design? Right? And there's a type of it called deep play, which is talking about death, talking about hard things. And if you practice that, you build muscles that are incredibly powerful for that sort of feeling of resilience. Sometimes I find it's helpful when we are trying to learn something new to let the images from that work wash over us. This is, a little experiment that you can allow kind of to wash over yourself in terms of what did we experience today? What did we talk about? What framework stuck with me? A good story sticks to your ribs, and you always don't know exactly what it means or what it's supposed to be about. But maybe later on, in another day or another year, something that we talked about today will spark for you. And I want you to connect back into that if you can, because that is how we change. That is how we allow ourselves to develop and to shift. And the more time we spend allowing these stories and experiences to wash over us, the more we can learn to relax into them and to trust that our bodies are wired to play in all kinds of ways, whether that's the Macarena or it's playing with your dog like that, whether it's having a conversation in a government or trying something new in a dramatically different way. And I hope that today is a little bit of a doorway into another way of thinking, something that's a little bit less structured, something that's a little bit more natural, something that looks like that garden, that looks like those weeds, that really is about that process of life. So, play is life. What's emerging, let it grow. I'm so grateful for the time. I hope that... Thank you.